Welcome back to my channel. If you are following this journey officially, then that means you are definitely entitled to know why we're here and to hear my story. And actually, I have written down our story several times. Probably 3 or 4 different times I've written it down like an actual story, like you're reading through what we've been through in the last 2 years. Because what kind of an English teacher would I be if I preached to my kids like, oh, if you're going through something really traumatic or you're going through something hard, like write about it. It really helps you process the emotions and get through it. If I tell my kids to write about what they're going through, why shouldn't I as well? So I've written this down lots. It's just time for me to actually speak about it. And it's long, so bear with me, but here we go. It all started in June of 2018 when I got married to my husband, Paul. And after about 6 or 7 months, I was getting that baby itch and he wasn't. And I could understand that and respect that. And I knew that, you know, maybe it's not time just quite yet. So, you know, we were doing what we could to prevent pregnancy. But then July of 2019, a little over a year after we got married, I remember it was a really cool, intimate moment. And I hope you all have this as well in your relationships, where he just kind of looked at me one night when we laid down and he said, you know, I think I'm ready to have a baby. And it was a really cool moment between us. I hope you get to have that as well. But people ask me all the time, how do you know if you're ready to even start trying? And I'm like, you don't know. There's no such thing as perfect timing, but you do both need to be on the same page. So that was a really cool moment. So starting July of 2019, we were officially trying to start a family. And just 2 months later, I had a positive pregnancy test. And I think I was surprised and not surprised. I didn't know anything about my body. I didn't know anything about trying to conceive. We were just hoping it happened, and it happened fairly quickly. And so our first pregnancy, we came home, I remember that Friday night, and we told his parents, and then it's like the universe was waiting. The next morning on Saturday, pretty much a half hour after we told my parents that we were expecting, I started spotting. And I called my nurse, wasn't freaking out too much because, you know, you can go to Google and like, oh, implantation spotting, and, you know, Google is your best friend and your worst enemy all at the same time. But I went that whole weekend spotting. It got heavier throughout the day on Saturday and on Sunday. I remember Sunday in church just praying like, it'll be okay, whatever it is, just give me a sign. Like, tell me if it's okay or not okay. And walked out of church, looked down at the bulletin, and there was a little blurb on next Sunday, join us for a mass honoring all who have had a miscarriage or infant loss. And I took that as a pretty clear sign. I was like, got it, thanks. So I had a strong feeling, but was still spotting and just kind of tried to stay calm. Went to school the next day, went to work, and at the end of the school day, the nurse called me and said, you need to go to the emergency room. I think you're having a miscarriage and you're Rh negative and you need to get the RhoGAM shot. I had no idea what all that meant. We can dive into that in another video, what the Rh factor is exactly. All I heard the nurse say was emergency room, and I started, you know, getting very emotional, and so I headed to the emergency room. Paul was working about an hour away at that time, and so my mom came with me, but he met me there, and we spent an awful evening in the emergency room that night. But there is one good thing that came from that is we actually had the nurse send some of my tissue that I was passing in to the lab to get tested. We didn't know what to say when she said, do you want to get this mass genetically tested? And I just said yes, because we wanted to know what happened to our baby, like what was wrong. And if we had not said yes, we would not be where we are today. More on that later, and I'm sure I'll end up making a video on that specifically. But anyway, after that night in the emergency room, obviously we had our first miscarriage, and I dealt with it surprisingly well. I just kind of moved on. You know, I thought this happens, this is normal, this is okay, we'll just keep trying. And luckily for me, I didn't have problems starting my cycle again after my miscarriage. And so the next month we started trying again, and we kept trying and trying and trying. and we were frustrated. We were confused. Why is this taking so much longer? Why isn't this happening again? It took us 2 months the first time. Like, what's going on? What's wrong? And this is the part where we really started learning a lot about our own bodies. And we, you know, when you're trying to conceive and you're doing your research, you learn a lot about, you know, how it actually works, how the anatomy actually works, because they don't actually teach you that in 8th grade health. There's no such thing as sex education here in America. So you go to Google. And our OB did help us a little bit along the way as well. Paul got a semen analysis. We did a few other small tests, like looked at my thyroid levels. But after about a year of trying post miscarriage, we were like, okay, enough's enough. Like we need to do something. It wasn't quite a year, but it was right around a year. And so our OB put us on Clomid. And after 2 months, 2 seems to be our magic number, we got pregnant again. And the second time we got pregnant was, so that would have been just this past October. So October of 2020, we got pregnant. And the day that I took my test and the day that we told everybody, there was a double rainbow here in our little small town. And we took that as a really cool sign. But I'm telling you what, God speaks in mysterious ways, because unfortunately for us, that pregnancy ended in a miscarriage as well. So now I think I know what the double rainbow meant. But anyway, so yes, we went in for our second or third ultrasound, and the baby, the embryo wasn't growing. But we did have a heartbeat. And then after, I think, our third ultrasound, there was no heartbeat anymore. And so I had a DNC. So second miscarriage. This time I was angry. This time I was frustrated. And there are so many emotions that come along with the miscarriage period. But after you've had 2 in, you know, a year and a half, it's very frustrating. And so I was unsure where to go from here, but I remember my dad really pushed and said, it's time, let's see a specialist. And so in January of this year, January of 2021, we saw our fertility specialist down in Columbus. And the first thing she told us when we had our Zoom meeting with her was, you have some lab work here from October 2019. Can you tell me a little bit about that? Here's where that comes in. That mass that we had sent in that had caused us a lot of problems and a lot of emotion had nothing to do with the embryo. It was all my tissue, and it came back with a chromosome translocation, so a genetic issue. And the specialist read that to us right away, and that's where we found out that I have a balanced translocation. So if it weren't for us sending in that tissue all the way back in 2019, I wouldn't know what our problem is here in 2021. Long story short, this specialist sent some more genetic testing for both of us, and it came back confirmed that I have a balanced translocation. What the heck does that mean? I can make a whole other video on that. But essentially, my chromosome 1 and my chromosome 2, when I was being made, switched places. So I have like half of chromosome 1 and half of chromosome 2 on one, and then I have half of chromosome 1 and half of chromosome 2 on the other. And so they're balanced, so I have the right amount of genetic material. That's why I function just like everybody else. But that means when I try to create a baby, if I pass on the wrong genetic material, I will likely create an embryo that would never make it to full term anyway. So it made a lot of sense. And so we had a few options: egg donor, IVF, lots of genetic. There was the one thing they don't tell you is that in IVF and in any of these situations, there are so many decisions you have to make, and no one tells you how to make them. And it's not like there's one right decision or one wrong decision, but it's like the weight of the world and the weight of your future is sitting on that decision. So we did consider egg donor there for a while, but we decided to go the IVF route. And so here we are. We started IVF, let's see, March? Yeah, middle March is when I started my shots. I started my stimulation medication in April. The weekend of Easter, the weekend of my birthday, was my egg retrieval. And I had to wait a month to let my ovaries settle down, and we transferred our first embryo in June. And unfortunately, it did not go as planned, and a whole nother rush of emotions came that time, but that is where we are now. And so we have one more embryo to work with, and we're kind of waiting on some other tests for now, but we are in the midst of our IVF journey. And that's our story. As quickly as I possibly could without going into too much detail, because nobody needs to sit here for 15 minutes and listen to me blabber. But that's our story, and that's why I'm here, is because we've come into contact with a lot, with miscarriage and the emotion that that brings, with trying to conceive and the frustration of not seeing that double pink line on your pregnancy test. We've dealt with seeing a specialist, getting Paul tested, getting me, so many tests on both of us, but especially on me. And then starting IVF and doing all the injections and the horrific egg retrieval that I will talk about in another video. And then, unfortunately, a failed transfer. And just all of the emotions that come along with it. Nobody could possibly prepare you for all of that. But if you're still here with me, thank you. Thank you for listening. And that's it. That's us. That's our story. And we are still trying to stay hopeful. We know that there are other options outside of IVF, which I will talk about in future videos. We know we'll be parents one day. We know we will. It's just going to take us a little bit longer to get there. And that's okay. It'll be worth it in the end. Because unfortunately, we were just born to bear this burden. But we're bearing it. We're carrying it the best we can. And so whatever struggle you're dealing with, I hope you're carrying it the best way that you know how. Thanks for joining, and stay awesome.